Okay, so get this. We're diving deep into Google. Like, how did they go from a couple of guys in a dorm room to, like, the Googie LE?
Yeah, it's a wild story.
It really is. And we've got Steven Levy's In the Plex as our guide for this deep dive.
Great book.
It is. And we're not just hitting the highlights here. We're going deep into the decisions, the near misses, and really how Google's whole way of thinking led them to, like, take over the digital world.
It's crazy to think back then. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the Google founders, they were total outsiders to the search world.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. It's 1996, Alta Vista is the king, and everyone's convinced that keywords are the answer.
Right. Keywords, keywords, keywords.
Exactly. But the problem was it was a total mess, just spam
So
everywhere.
total keyword chaos.
Yeah, and everyone was focused on building a faster, bigger index.
Right.
But Page and Brin, these Stanford students, they weren't even playing that game. They saw something different.
Like what?
They realized that links were the real key.
Links. So,
They saw how links created this web of authority online. Like if a really important website links to your site, that means something,
okay, I see. That makes sense.
right? And that's how PageRank was born.
Yeah.
It's a system that ranks pages based on the quality of their backlinks.
So it's not just about how many links you have, but who's linking to you.
Exactly. It's about authority.
That seems so obvious now.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But back then, it was revolutionary. And the crazy thing, other smart people were working on similar ideas.
Really?
Yeah. But Google just got there first.
That first mover advantage is huge.
It's everything in tech. And it wasn't just the tech that made Google different. Their early days were almost like a Silicon Valley island of misfit toys.
Haha. Love that.
They almost sold to Excite for $1 million.
$1 million.
Wow.
Can you imagine being the Excite guys who passed on that?
Talk about missing the boat.
Seriously.
Um,
But then they go and hire Jeff Dean.
Now, that was a power move.
Right. This is not just any tech hire. We're talking about a legend in computer science.
Exactly. Jeff Dean, he basically wrote the book on distributed systems, which is the tech behind handling massive amounts of data.
So he was the guy they needed to build something truly huge.
Absolutely.
Right.
Bringing in Dean showed everyone that Google was serious. But those early days were still pretty chaotic. Constant server crashes, engineers on call all night long.
Yeah, I've heard stories. It sounds stressful.
It was. But their big breakthrough came when they ditched the idea of buying expensive servers.
Okay, so what did they do?
They started building their own, cheaper, more powerful, more Google.
So that's how they laid the foundation for those massive data centers they have now.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They became the masters of information at a scale no one had ever seen before.
Speaking of massive amounts of information, let's talk about Gmail. I mean, everyone uses Gmail,
Right.
but it's fascinating because it also started as this kind of rebel project.
You're telling me Paul Buchheit, the guy behind Gmail, even thought Google was going to get crushed by Alta Vista back then?
No.
Yeah. And remember back then, email storage was measured in megabytes. People were constantly deleting messages just to make space.
I remember those days.
And then, boom, Gmail launches with a whole gigabyte of storage for free.
A gigabyte. That must have seemed like a joke at the time.
It did. People were like, is this a hoax?
Hmm.
It was unheard of.
It was almost like they were saying, delete, why delete information is precious, keep it all.
Right. And that wasn't necessarily a comfortable idea for everyone.
I mean, remember all the initial freak out about Gmail not having an easy delete button?
Oh, yeah. People felt like Google was permanently recording every email they sent.
Like Big Brother.
Yeah. But Google's philosophy was different. They saw it as a way to learn from how we use email to make it better.
And more useful for them.
Well, of course, it helped them refine those targeted ads we all know and love.
Yeah, so think about this. You're emailing a friend about planning a trip to, say, Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
And suddenly, bam, ads for Hawaiian shirts and surfboards are following you all over the internet.
It's a little creepy, but it works.
It does. It taps into that tension we all have. Like, we want privacy, but we also want convenience and personalized experiences.
Right. Google has always been pushing those boundaries, testing how much we're willing to trade for a smoother digital life.
Okay, now let's talk about don't be evil. This is like the quintessential Google slogan.
It is.
But it's also been analyzed, debated, maybe even dismissed over the years. Like, did they really mean it, or was it just a catchy marketing thing?
You know what's really interesting about that slogan is it wasn't some CEO in a boardroom who came up with it.
Really?
It was an engineer named Amit Patel who just started writing Don't Be Evil on whiteboards all over the Google Plex.
Like a one-man ethics campaign?
Exactly. And it totally captured that early Google vibe. Kind of chaotic engineers calling the shots, this mix of brilliance and playfulness.
But then that little phrase ends up in their IPO filing.
Yeah, and suddenly it's not just an internal motto, it's this global statement that everyone's watching.
And judging.
And the scrutiny really intensified when Google went into China.
Right, because they were forced to filter search results there.
Exactly. They were trying to walk this tightrope between doing business and staying true to their values.
And they eventually pulled out of China altogether, right?
They did, citing censorship and even a cyber attack on their users. It was a defining moment for them.
It forced them to confront the limits of don't be evil in a world that doesn't always play fair.
Right. It makes you wonder, does that slogan still hold any weight in today's Google?
It's a good question. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the Googleplex itself. Because it's more than just a playground for tech geniuses.
It's true. The Googleplex is designed for maximum productivity.
Which is so Google.
It is. They're obsessed with efficiency, with squeezing every bit of value out of every minute.
Right, and there are stories about how their conference rooms are stocked with everything you could possibly need. Chargers, projectors, even pens.
All to eliminate any excuse to waste time.
Wow, so that laser focus on efficiency extends to their hiring practices too, I imagine.
Absolutely. They're not just looking for brilliant minds, they're looking for googliness.
Googliness.
Yeah, it's this special blend of talent, passion, and a willingness to think outside the box.
So could your workplace benefit from a little bit of that googly magic?
It's something to think about. I think a lot of companies are trying to copy that formula, but it's not easy.
And I think part of Google's success comes from their willingness to experiment, to go after things that other companies thought were crazy.
Like what?
Well, take acquisitions, for example. Early Google wasn't really into buying other companies. They thought they could build it all themselves.
That's classic Silicon Valley thinking.
Right. But then they buy DoubleClick.
DoubleClick, the company that specialized in display advertising.
Yeah, those ads you see all over the web.
That was a huge deal.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
Suddenly they weren't just the kings of search. They were a major force in online advertising.
It was a massive expansion of their reach and influence,
And then there's Android.
which was initially meant to compete with BlackBerry.
Right, but it ended up becoming the world's most popular mobile operating system.
And it all started with this simple idea: what if anyone could build a phone using our software?
So now they're not just a website. They're literally in people's pockets all over the world.
Yeah, it's amazing how everything Google touches seems to turn to gold.
But I think a lot of their success came from their ability to adapt, to change course when they needed to.
Like with Google Voice.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
It started as this tiny startup called Grand Central Stuff. Google saw the potential and turned it into a stealth phone carrier.
Shaking up the telecom industry.
Exactly. So you see, they're aiming way beyond search, using their data and engineering talent to reshape entire industries.
And that ambition even led them to the White House.
You're talking about Dan Soroker, the Google engineer who took a leave of absence to run Obama's online campaign analytics.
Yeah, that's right.
He played a key role in Obama's victory. And suddenly this idea of government should be like Google started gaining traction.
It's fascinating how Silicon Valley thinking started to influence the highest levels of government.
Yeah, they went from this scrappy startup to this lobbying powerhouse, changing the way government used technology.
And it all circles back to their core philosophy. Data-driven decisions, a focus on the user, and constant improvement.
It's an incredible story, and we've only just scratched the surface. Yeah. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how Google shaped our digital lives and ask some tough questions. Has their power come at a cost? What happens when a company that started with "don't be evil" becomes one of the most powerful forces on the planet? Stay tuned. So we left off talking about Google getting involved in Washington.
Right, this idea of government as a Google.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounds great. You know, data-driven, user-focused, constantly evolving.
But let's be honest, government isn't exactly known for being quick and innovative.
That's true. So did this whole googly approach actually work?
Good question.
Well, there were some definite wins. Like, remember the Haiti earthquake back in 2010?
Yeah.
Google engineers actually teamed up with the State Department, and they built this crisis mapping tool in just a few days.
That's amazing.
It allowed people to donate money through text messages.
So they could bypass all the usual red tape.
Exactly. They got aid to where it was needed fast.
That's incredible. It really shows how technology can respond to a crisis in a way that traditional systems can't.
Absolutely. Talk about making a real impact.
Yeah, but it wasn't all smooth sailing, I imagine.
No. As Google's power grew, so did the scrutiny.
Makes sense.
They became this major lobbying force in D.C.
Okay.
And that rubbed some people the wrong way, especially those who remember their "don't be evil" roots.
Right. Some people accuse them of getting too cozy with the Obama administration.
Exactly, like blurring the lines between tech giant and government.
So it's complicated. They're bringing their expertise to the table, but they're also navigating this world of political influence.
Right. And speaking of influence, let's talk about Google's ambition to digitize every book in the world.
Oh, yeah. This was a huge project.
Larry Page was really passionate about this. He wanted to create this universal library accessible to anyone, anywhere.
It sounds like a noble goal.
It does. But I remember a lot of controversy around Google Books.
Yeah, what was the issue?
Well, publishers and authors weren't happy.
Why not?
They accused Google of copyright infringement.
Ah, so they're basically saying Google was profiting from their work without permission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It turned into this huge legal battle that went on for years.
So how did Google respond?
They didn't back down. They saw it as this fight for the future of information.
Interesting.
Their argument was that making information accessible to everyone was their ultimate mission, and digitizing books was a crucial part of that.
So they believe the benefits outweighed the copyright concerns.
Yeah, and they did make some compromises along the way.
Yeah.
They worked out a deal with publishers to create a revenue-sharing model.
So people could buy digital copies of books through Google.
Right, and they also limited users to seeing snippets of copyrighted works, not the entire text.
So they tried to find a middle ground.
They did, but it didn't completely silence the critics.
I bet.
There were still plenty of people who saw Google Books as this power grab, a way for them to control access to information.
Right, like a digital monopoly.
Exactly. And they argued that in the long run, it would hurt authors and publishers.
So it's a debate that continues to this day.
It does, and it raises some important questions about the role of technology in our lives.
Okay, so let's shift gears again and talk about social networking. This is an area where Google, despite being this giant in other fields, really struggled.
It's true. They couldn't quite figure out how to connect people on a social level.
It's ironic, isn't it? The company that connected the world through search couldn't quite crack the code of social connection.
I know, it's surprising. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think part of it might be that Google's approach is so deeply rooted in algorithms.
But they were masters at organizing information.
But maybe they weren't as good at understanding the human side of relationships.
Yeah, maybe. And their early attempts at social networking like Orkut, they had some success in certain parts of the world.
But they never really went global.
Right. And they missed some big opportunities.
Like what?
Well, there's this story about a small Google team that created this location-based social network called Dodgeball.
Dodgeball.
Yeah, it was kind of like a precursor to Foursquare.
Okay.
But Google didn't really give it the resources it needed to grow, and it eventually fizzled out.
So they had the talent, but maybe not the vision?
Maybe. It seems like they underestimated the power of social connections.
The idea that a recommendation from a friend is more valuable than a search result.
Right. And then, of course, there's Facebook, the king of social networking.
Yeah, how did Google react to their meteoric rise?
They tried to play catch-up.
But it was an uphill battle.
It was. They launched Google Buzz, which was basically a social layer on top of Gmail.
Right, I remember that.
But it was a flop,
Yeah,
plagued with privacy concerns, and it never really gained traction.
not their finest hour.
No, not really. They tried again with Google. Plus,
Yeah, that was a little better.
it was. But Facebook already had this huge advantage.
Yeah,
They were the place where people went to connect with their friends and family.
and that's hard to disrupt.
It is. Even for a company as powerful as Google.
So even Google has its blind spots.
They do. And those missteps became even more apparent as the mobile revolution took hold.
Right, Google had a huge advantage with Android.
I did.
But they also faced a whole new set of rivals. Apple with its iPhone and all these other mobile players.
The game was changing, and Google had to adapt.
So what did they do?
Well, they went all in on Android, making it free and open source.
Smart move.
It helped Android spread like wildfire. They also poured resources into mobile apps, realizing that people were using their phones for a lot more than just search.
Right.
And they made some strategic acquisitions like YouTube, recognizing that video was going to be huge on mobile.
So they were scrambling, trying to stay ahead of the curve.
They were, but could they hold on to their dominance in this mobile-first world?
That's the question we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at how Google dealt with antitrust scrutiny, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the constant battle for our attention in this world of digital distractions. We're back and still digging into Google's story using In the Plex as our guide.
Yeah, last time we were talking about how the mobile revolution really shook things up for them.
It was a whole new ballgame.
It was. They had Android, which was huge. But they were also up against Apple and the iPhone, which was changing everything.
And let's not forget about the antitrust scrutiny. Google was getting so big that regulators were starting to get nervous.
Right, even Microsoft, their old rival, was lobbying against them.
It's funny how Google tried to distance themselves from Microsoft in that whole antitrust battle.
Yeah, they kept saying they weren't trying to lock users into a closed system like Microsoft had done with Windows.
They were all about openness and innovation.
Exactly. They pointed to Android as proof, a free open source platform that anyone could use.
But some people saw right through that.
Oh, yeah. Some people thought Android was just a clever way for Google to dominate the mobile market.
By giving it away for free, they were making sure that Google's services would be on billions of devices.
Like search and maps.
Exactly. It's a classic Google move, isn't it?
It is. Find a way to align their business with what users want.
Make it super convenient to use their products.
Right, and that convenience factor became even more important as they faced a whole new wave of digital distractions.
People were spending more time on social media and mobile games. All these apps that weren't Google's.
So they had to find ways to keep people engaged with their core products.
How did they do that?
Well, they started integrating social features into search, trying to personalize results based on your connections.
But they still couldn't crack the social code.
Nope. Google Plus never really took off like they hoped.
It seemed like no matter what they tried, they just couldn't replicate Facebook's magic.
Yeah, it just wasn't their thing.
Even a company as brilliant as Google has its limits. And that brings us to artificial intelligence. This was an area where Google saw a huge opportunity.
Oh, yeah, they'd been investing in AI research for years.
But now they were starting to see real-world applications.
Like Google Translate.
Which got super accurate thanks to machine learning.
Right, or Google Photos, which could recognize faces and objects in pictures with amazing precision.
It felt like the future.
It did. And Google was all in on AI acquiring companies like DeepMind.
Which specialized in deep learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were positioning themselves as the leaders in this whole AI race.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
No, AI also raised some ethical concerns.
Like what?
Well, people started worrying about the potential for AI to be misused, to create biased algorithms.
Or even become a threat to humanity.
It was a valid concern.
So how did Google respond?
Well, they created an AI ethics council. They published principles for responsible AI development. They even open sourced some of their AI tools.
So they were trying to be more transparent.
Exactly, trying to strike a balance between innovation and responsibility.
It's a tough balance.
It is, and it's only going to get tougher as AI becomes more powerful.
It really makes you think, where do we go from here? How do we use this technology for good while protecting ourselves from the potential risks?
It's the big question, and Levy's book doesn't have all the answers.
But it does give us a framework for understanding how Google thinks and operates.
And how their decisions are shaping the world we live in.
It's amazing to think they started as this small search engine and became this global force that touches almost every aspect of our lives.
It's quite a story.
And remember, the book ends in 2011. So much has happened since then.
Like what?
Well, they've faced even more scrutiny, even more debates about AI ethics and antitrust lawsuits.
It makes you wonder, have they stayed true to their original vision?
Has Don't Be Evil survived all these years?
That's something for you to think about.
Because understanding Google isn't just about using their products.
It's about understanding the forces that are shaping our digital lives.
So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions. The story of Google is far from over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Google's incredible journey.